Matrix is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of Shorts with Liz Clark. With over 20 years as a dedicated supporter of the fitness industry, we're thrilled to continue a partnership geared towards success for all those who believe in better.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Shorts with Liz. I am really excited about this episode. It's going to be a little bit different today because we are announcing a new segment called Policy in Progress, the HFA Short Report. Maybe because Mike and I are not the tallest in stature, but I don't know who named that. We might need to look into the short report. But I think this is going to be a lot of fun today and very informative. And thank you for joining. So for those of you that don't know, my colleague Mike Goscinski is our head of government affairs, and he's been leading the charge for us on Capitol Hill on all of our policy initiatives and our recent fly-in. And we're going to dig in with Mike today a little bit on what that all means for the industry and ultimately what that means for the PHIT Act, for the click-to-cancel legislation, and so many other things that are impacting our industry day by day here in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Mike. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
Yes.
I'm excited to be a part of Shorts.
Good. I'm excited to have you. So listen, Mike, you and I have been doing sort of this Hill thing for a while, and I know that it's not really a language that most people speak every day. And talk a little bit about, maybe go back in time to the fly-in, because I do think that was a pretty instrumental time for our industry and what that meant. What was everybody doing here in Washington, and how has that laid the groundwork for us and what we're doing these next couple weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. So long story short, the fly-in is our signature advocacy event of the year, where we literally fly in members of the industry to meet with lawmakers and discuss the important issues that impact their business.
Like how many?
So this year we had about just over 130
Wow.
full, and we met with over 120 members of Congress and their staff. And I said it a few times during the fly-in, but I really want to drive this point home, right? We're up there every day talking with members of Congress. We're meeting with members all the time. The amount of meetings that we are able to have in a 48-hour span when all our members come to town is the work that we do in a few months. Yeah. And so it really helps us encapsulate our message on Capitol Hill, put tangible business faces to the names and the businesses that are operating within the districts that all of the members of Congress represent, and really drive home the points of what we're trying to do every day up here in Washington.
Yeah. Okay, so Mike, so we had all these CEOs, executives here in town, and this has now been a couple years of building up to this. Explain a little bit why the importance of in-person meetings matter and why it's worthwhile for people to take time out of their day running their businesses to come here and to start to build relationships. How does that really work?
Yeah, and it sounds counterintuitive, right? We as an advocacy-based trade association, we're here advocating on behalf of the industry, but there's almost so much of our members' story that we can tell. And having them come to town and meet with lawmakers directly and explaining to lawmakers the businesses they operate, it breaks down the veil between the logos that they see on the door and down Main Street in their districts and what's really going on behind the scenes, the people who are operating those businesses, the constituents that they're serving, and the work that they're actually doing to create a healthier United States and ultimately world.
Yeah, and what was interesting specifically this year on the timing, I think we got, on one instance, you could say a little bit lucky as far as the conversation's going, but then also there were sort of years of buildup to the timing of this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, you're right. We always plan our fly-in to be in May as Physical Activity and Sports Month here in the United States.
Mental Health Awareness Month.
Mental Health Awareness Month, and it really allows us to paint the full picture and be able to promote physical activity and getting physically active for your mental and physical health in a real way. But this year it was unique because while our members were in town, Congress was actually working on a huge piece of legislation that we have been planning for nearly 3 years now, which is this big, beautiful bill, as the president will call it, the reconciliation package. Mm-hmm. And this is a unique legislative tool that Congress has at their disposal when Washington is in one-party control. So after Election Day, when President Trump won the White House and Republicans gained and retained control of the House and Senate, it allowed them to use this signature tool to get big pieces of legislation across the finish line. So as we've been working towards the PHIT Act, which we all see as a health bill because it gets Americans more physically active and will help lead to a healthier population, it's actually a tax bill. And so we need a piece of legislation that's going to open up that tax code in order to get PHIT included and across the finish line. And we have been planning now for nearly 3 years for this moment. It just so happens that Congress was literally writing the bill while we were meeting with lawmakers, which was very exciting.
Yes. And so what's your takeaway on how you think legislators responded to us being here kind of at the right moment, for everything to be coming together? And how do you think, from your perspective, conversations went with most of those meetings?
Yeah, and my perspective means a lot, but really I like to hear what our members have to say, and those who attended actually made some really good points that have attended in previous fly-ins in the past, where they said for the first time as we were on the Hill, it felt like the lawmakers knew what we were talking about. And that's due to the groundwork that HFA has been laying.
First, they knew
years.
who we were,
yeah.
right? That's a big step in and of itself, right? I think one of the things I talk about so often is that there are hundreds of special interests here in Washington, and people that are meeting, dozens and dozens of meetings a day, these members of Congress do, and it's everything from every sector that you can imagine. So the fact that we've arrived on the scene and they knew us, that in of itself is kind of a win, right?
Absolutely. And then to the point that we make all the time to our members, who don't really get too deep into the process like we all are, every time there's a new Congress, there's fresh faces that know nothing about the industry, the policies that we're pushing, and the work that we're trying to do. So it's a re-education campaign starting in January of every other year. And so having members come back and give us the feedback that in their meetings on Capitol Hill, that the offices were responsive, they understood the issue, they understood the legislation, and they understood the opportunity for inclusion in the reconciliation bill, speaks volumes about the work that's being done to really get us to this moment. And we strike while the iron's hot, and we did just that, and we were successful, which is something that we don't always get to do coming out of a fly-in. But
and I think one of the things you and I talk about so often is what an amazing industry this is, and to be able to represent it is an honor. And really, I think what happens is the nature of how interesting our industry is and how people feel so connected to it, that there's already a natural gravitation to care about things like this, right? And so we're one of the industries that I would say is a very bipartisan industry, right? We get people on both sides.
Yeah, nobody there, right? Every time we talk about PHIT, every time we talk about the work that we're doing, the common feedback is always, this is common sense, because everybody understands it. Also, what I will say is, and I know you experience this in your day-to-day as well, whenever you start having conversations about the industry, start having conversations about the work we're doing, everybody immediately jumps in with, oh yeah, I work out here. I do spin classes here. Are they a member? And we get the opportunity to represent such a great industry and say, yes, those are our members. So it's an automatic foot in the door for the conversation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's a little bit of an aha moment when people come to Washington and they sort of see it is that because we're competing with so many different voices, industries, that type of thing, it is an aha moment and it is like a no-brainer. But at the other hand, every time, even though this industry's been working on an issue like PHIT for almost 20 years, 60% of Congress is new.
Yeah.
So I know even my time on the Hill, half of my meetings were with legislators that had never even heard of it.
Right.
So even though the industry might be starting to feel like they're getting a little tired of it, with again, such a new, fresh face on Congress, it's a real opportunity.
And that goes back to the importance of members being here and actually doing it themselves. Look, I can talk to 20 members of Congress a day and talk about the industry that our members are so great at turning into a part of every American's life. But at the end of the day, I can't make that last little inch of actually connecting with a member of Congress as a business owner operating in their district and serving their constituents. So when we bring members to town, that's the best part. We always say, all you have to do is come here and tell your story, because we can talk about the wonkiness and the legislation and what tax provision is going to be edited and what the different legislative text changes are. All you need to do is say, I run this operation, employ this many people, and service this many people within the community.
Right, and there's such a halo for what many of our members are small businesses. And to be able to really hammer that point is, I think that oftentimes our industry is confused with a lot of big brands, but not a clear understanding of how the franchise model works and all of that. And so to be able to sort of say, well, we're here on behalf of, a business that's in every congressional district in the entire country is a big differentiator from so many other industries.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we're an industry that's recognized by the big brands and recognized by the brands that everybody knows and loves, as we were talking about, that they maybe utilize and participate in. But being able to share the difference of what those brands actually represent, as you mentioned, in the franchise network, in the small business community, it's really enlightening for lawmakers. And then all of a sudden they see the difference in the work that we're doing and how it will actually not only be implemented on the ground, but how it'll serve the greater good.
Yeah, so when I talk about effective lobbying, I think of it in sort of either 4 legs of a chair or 3 legs of a stool, depending, right? So it's the shoe leather stuff that we just did with all of our members. It's having a communications megaphone to be able to make sure that we're getting all of our good talking points and data out. And then it's grassroots, which is all the work back home. But there's another piece to it that I think really helps industries stand out. And I'd be curious is about one of the things that differentiates this conversation is when you are able to have PAC dollars behind them. So maybe can you speak a little bit as to not only what the PAC is, maybe just start there, but then how we're leveraging that every day to continue this conversation day in and day in and day out.
Sure, and if you look at the example I used, right, if we switch it to the 3-legged stool, it's policy, it's public relations, and then it's politics. And on the politics side, we have the HFA PHIT PAC, which is our political action committee. PACs sometimes get a very negative connotation in the public space because they hear about it on the news, they hear about the corporate PACs, they hear about
super
PACs and ways that it's used to influence an election. And at the end of the day, what the PAC is that we have as a part of the association are voluntary contributions from our leaders in the industry that allow us to contribute to those who support our goals. And so as we work with members of Congress, we talk to them about the policy. We are out there screaming with the bullhorn about the work that needs to be done and the work that Congress needs to do. But at the end of the day, you ultimately need to be able to thank the elected officials that are helping get it done. And not only that, but we can invest in individual members and candidates who we know will support the cause and drive towards creating a Congress that is receptive to the work that we're working towards and also willing to step up and help as leaders.
Yes. So we now know that PHIT is in the big, beautiful bill,
Yes.
The reconciliation package, if you will. Can you speak a little bit to first what PHIT is for maybe those that haven't been following and working on this for 2 decades, and then also what it really means to be part of this big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, so first, for anybody that hasn't been a part of the conversation for nearly 2 decades, PHIT is a piece of legislation, the Personal Health Investment Today Act, and what it would do is enable Americans to utilize their pre-tax dollars through health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts that are typically reserved for utilization of buying over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, paying for your prescription drugs, paying for your doctor's appointments and visits. Now it would expand it out to pay for physical activity expenses such as gym memberships, fitness classes, personal training, and youth sports expenses. And so we've been working on this bill previously, and now the Health and Fitness Association have been working to get this done for, as I mentioned, nearly 2 decades. And we have been working internally for about 3 years towards this goal of getting it included in the reconciliation package. And as I mentioned earlier, the reconciliation package is a unique tool that's only available when Congress and Washington, D.C. is in one-party control. But in 2017, during President Trump's first term, they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was a series of business tax provisions, among others, that lowered corporate tax rates, interest rates, et cetera, for industries to take advantage of. And all of those provisions were set to expire this year as of December 31st, 2025. So we knew internally in our planning that this was going to be our opportunity. Regardless of who won the White House, regardless of how Congress changed hands, we knew that those tax provisions were going to be expiring and that this year was going to be the prime opportunity because Congress has no choice but to act on these tax provisions. So we've been doing the due diligence and planning to work to make sure that we've got the language and the provisions around PHIT into a position that they were acceptable to Congress to incorporate in this bill. And when I say acceptable to Congress, it's because, to your point, we are up against every other public interest known to man in the United States in the work that we do here in Washington, D.C. So you have everybody from the pharmaceutical companies, you have big oil, you have auto manufacturers and dealers, retailers, everyone under the sun clamoring for this one opportunity to get any changes to the Internal Revenue Code or to the tax code done right now. So it's a heavy feat. It's a tall hill to climb, and that's why we've been so steadfast at beating the drum constantly to position PHIT for an opportunity for inclusion. And I'm just happy that we were able to do it.
Yes, good job. Yeah. So to this point, though, where do we go now? So what's the timing? It's through the House. And that doesn't mean it's done yet, though.
No, we are far away from done. But there's the president has a lofty timeline of getting it done by the 4th of July. The reconciliation package across the finish line on his desk to be signed by the 4th of July, which is if anybody has ever watched the way things move in the Senate, a very lofty goal. So, as you mentioned, we were included in the House side, which is really the biggest first hurdle of our tasks here.
And I think just for scope, the reason why, right, because that's 435 votes.
Right.
The Senate's going to be tough, but versus 100 versus 435, that's a lot of cats and dogs with a lot of different priorities, right?
That's a lot of competing priorities that they need to wrangle. Then don't forget, the House has a margin. The Republicans have a margin of, I believe, 5 seats in the House of Representatives. So that is very few votes that they can lose at the end of the day. And so when we're working with Congress to get it in, that's why priority number 1 is making sure we are in the House text. Because now that we're in and they were able to usher it onto the floor and pass it out of the House, the bill moves to the Senate. And in the Senate, it's going to, as the Federalist Papers intended, it's going to cool the tea, so to speak, and they're going to work to try and make a palatable bill that ultimately can garner the 51 votes in the Senate and get to the president's desk. So right now, the Senate is working on changing the language into an acceptable format that they see to hopefully take up and pass. And that's why our work is not done. We are steadfast right now working with every member in the Senate to make sure that they understand that this is a priority and that needs to get done this year. And we're hopeful that as they work on drafting this week, they'll continue to keep the language that we were able to secure intact. And hopefully they'll be able to vote this out and get it on the president's desk by the 4th of July.
Yeah, I am cautiously optimistic on that timeline. And the reason being is because the president also put a very aggressive timeline on the House, and they lived up to it. So I think the pressure is on for the Senate. And then I think we've got some good line of sight, though, because, of course, it has to get through the Senate, and then it has to get across the president's desk. And I think we've got some good line of sight that the president will sign it. But you talked about this administration, and I want to shift a little bit to the MAHA movement and what that means for us as an industry, for opportunities for PHIT or other things to be in the priority of the White House.
Yeah, and I think it's worth taking a step back and just understanding that as the only nonprofit representing the health and fitness industry here in Washington, D.C., it does not matter who's in the chair at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. It does not matter who is at the helm as Secretary of Health and Human Services, or who is the director of CMS, or who's in Congress, frankly. Our job is to make sure that we are sharing the industry's voice and getting done what we can get done in whatever climate we're in. So now when the president won the White House and appointed Robert F. Kennedy as Secretary of Health and Human Services, it posed a real opportunity for us and the industry, because on the campaign trail, RFK spoke about the need for physical activity. We knew that this was going to be, that the MAHA agenda was going to be a priority of this administration. So it allowed us to plan, think about the way that we wanted to go at making sure that the priorities that we've worked on since coming to HFA and that the industry has worked on for time now gets in front of the voices that matter and ultimately takes advantage of this receptive opportunity to get it across the finish line. So we're looking at everything, and I think this is the exciting thing about the work that we do, is what this opportunity has posed us is the opportunity to think big. So thinking past PHIT, which, knock on wood, we're able to think past PHIT, but and plan on other ways to expand. It all comes down to what that big, beautiful, hairy, audacious goal is that you laid out at the show and that we've been working towards here, which is to ultimately increase the number of Americans and the percentage of Americans who are actually meeting the physical activity needs to live a healthy lifestyle to 30%, up from the 24% where we are now by 2030.
Yes, I think I want to also raise a point too, though, because you speak of the HHS secretary, and one of the things that we were pretty deliberate about was during his confirmation hearing, asking the question, is fitness essential?
Yeah.
And the answer was yes. Now, does that mean anything in law and practice? No. But this industry got so burned a few years ago by not being seen as essential, right? So why was that such a deliberate thing that we did, and where do we go from here to continue to elevate the essentialness of our industry?
Right. Well, if you think about what our mission is as the organization, that ultimately at the end of the day, first and foremost, it's to protect the operators in the industry. And unfortunately, that was what was missing during the pandemic when the industry was the first to close and the last to open. The people were not here having those conversations. And unfortunately, the term essential got thrown around a lot. And it's ultimately insulting that this industry was not considered essential. And so every day in our meetings, that's the first thing that we talk about is how we make sure this never happens again, because we know that physical activity is essential in every American's life to make sure that they stay physically and mentally healthy. And we need to make sure that every policymaker does. So as we're working to not only protect the industry, but then promote the industry and the way that we can position it with folks like RFK or Dr. Oz or with the president as the leading tip of the spear in the MAHA movement and in the movement to shift our American healthcare system to a prevention-based society, we need to start from scratch of saying, don't ever let this happen again.
Yes, and I think that as we look ahead, those relationships are going to matter, because this is one policy opportunity with PHIT right now, but there are others on the horizon. We're not even talking about all the challenges at the state level today, but another sort of challenge and opportunity is the click to cancel FEC ruling. So can you speak a little bit to what that means in practicality for what happened from a policy perspective, and then practicality, what that means for our members, and then what's the next steps?
Yeah, so, FTC click to cancel is a really good example of what it means to have a voice at the table. So this has been a regulatory process that's been going on since, I laugh, since we were IRSA. And so, we first engaged with FTC and filed comments once they released the original proposed rule. And upon reading, they were treating the industry as if it was an online Candy Crush subscription, as opposed to the in-person brick and mortar, business and operation that we know it is. And so we laid that out and explained to them a lot along the way of how the intricacies of the proposed regulation would impact the industry. For example, one of the things that many may not realize is that in the initial draft of the regulation, they removed the ability for our members to offer a save option or a step down option if somebody wanted to either freeze or cancel or terminate their agreement. And so they were putting the industry into a situation that even if I went in and said, hey, I broke my arm, I would like to take a 3-month break, but I don't want to sign up again, that would be removed from the operation completely. And so we were able to claw back provisions such as that. But ultimately, the FTC released their final rule that was set to go into implementation in May. And in the final rule, across the board, we were able to chalk up about 6 wins in terms of clawing back some of those onerous provisions that the FTC just had no idea how they applied to the industry.
Well, right, like the definition of immediate,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. And explaining to them just how the industry operates. Many in the industry use third-party payment processing, and then working to make sure that all of that was understood. And that's actually where the last remaining sticking point is. So the final rule was set to go into effect on May 14th, but there's still one provision that unfortunately is just very ambiguous around if the terminology about the click, so to speak, needs to immediately cancel payment terms. And as we all know, many of the agreements in the industry require a certain day that you cancel by. And so that murkiness in the final rule ultimately sets the industry up for failure in compliance. So we've been working through coalition partners and through the courts to have this case heard before the Eighth Circuit. So our partners, we're a member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and so some of our coalition partners, such as the U.S. Chamber and others, have been bringing this case in the Eighth Circuit. We filed an amicus brief to hopefully have the court issue a stay on implementation of the final rule, because to your point, we understand, the industry understands the need for consumer protection and the need for consumer-friendly cancellation policies. But what they also need to understand is that they need to be business tenable. And at the end of the day, the industry needs to be able to do it, or else it sets them up for failure, not only with the FTC and with the federal government, but with ultimately their customers. And so we've been working to slow that down, hopefully get that stay. But that is another thing that we were successful at during the fly-in, to have a 60-day implementation delay put into place as a result of the work that we were doing on Capitol Hill, which buys the industry more time to be able to comply.
Yes, that's a big deal. 60 days, I mean, that's a game changer for a lot of our members. Okay, Mike, so let's talk a little bit about MAHA and the movement going on there. They've just recently released this commission report. It's pretty thick. What's in there, and is there anything that the industry should be excited about?
Yeah, and so this is something that we've seen as an opportunity, right? That receptive audience, we have to work with everybody. And so we knew that they'd be working towards making America healthy again. They've been talking about it. MAHA is their slogan. And they've recently released this report that focuses on youth in America, nutrition, diet, exercise, and everything that the government needs to be focused on, even with some recommendations on how they can focus on policy to do that. And they just recently actually released the report at the White House, which you had the honor of being in the room for. And it was across government. It wasn't only the Secretary of Health and Human Services and Dr. Oz as the ones who we think about being in this realm, but it was across the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, everybody else. So do you want to mention it all being over there?
Right now, I mean, it was pretty interesting to be part of this dozen of these commissioners. So it's a lot of the faces and celebrities, if you will, that we've come to know. But it was also the head of the FDA was in the room, the head of the Department of Agriculture is in the room, talking about everything from healthy farming, healthy soil, really interesting, I think, lens that it's being looked at. And to your point, our job is to work with whoever's in that seat anyway. So it was great to be there on behalf of the sort of health and fitness sector, if you will.
Well, and a large part of getting anything done in Washington is about being in the right room and the right time. And so one of the things that I'm very excited about is that HFA was one of the only trade associations represented in that room, and we were certainly the only one there speaking about physical activity.
Yes, sir. Well, I want to talk about something now also it's a very hot issue right now, and that's around tariffs. And I think everybody is trying to get their head around what this means, that the ebbs and flows, the pauses, the implementation. But this is an industry that will be deeply impacted, that not only our industry vendor partner community, but then all of the brick and mortar gyms that are buying all the stuff going into them. What do you say when we talk about tariffs?
And it's a hard discussion to have because, like you said, every industry is impacted by this. Our job is to make sure that the industry's voice is heard. And ultimately, just because every industry is impacted doesn't mean they don't need to hear how the industry is impacted. And at the end of the day, we talked about this at the fly-in, and we've been talking about this in our meetings with lawmakers about just how the uncertainty around the tariff situation poses restrictions to growth and investment. And so we took to Capitol Hill during the fly-in, but we've been really communicating across the board throughout government about, look, it's not about what the number is. It's about just knowing what the number is. Because as everybody's looking to invest in their businesses, grow in their businesses, connecting the dots again back to the franchise business model and how some of them have, requirements to update equipment, requirements to follow different branding guidelines. We just need to make sure that the industry's voice is a part of that mix, and so we've been doing so. Recently, actually, we've just engaged with the administration by filing comments in the Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. And that wasn't done proactively necessarily, but in response, because you did have folks calling for added tariffs of 232 on equipment for the fitness industry, dumbbells, kettlebells,
I mean, specifically called out.
Specifically called out.
Yes.
And so, one of the things that we benefit from is having an eye and an ear on the ground here in Washington, seeing when that happens, because now I have sitting in their inbox a 10-page response explaining why they should not be tariffing these products. And that's the type of work that we need to do. But again, to your point, everyone is engaged at this. The uncertainty is the challenge.
Yes. So in closing, Mike, tell us a little bit now. People are obviously going to be so fired up to go do something after hearing our update. And as we are looking literally with PHIT on the horizon and so many other things in the political space, if somebody wants to get involved, what can they do?
So first and foremost, for everyone in the industry, right now is the time when we need all voices and all hands on deck. So HFA has a simple one-click campaign tool that we can make sure is involved in the show notes here. And what that does is allow everyone within the company, everyone within the industry, everyone's friends, family, members. So all of our members, right? I like to say that our members are our grassroots army, but every one of our members have thousands of grassroots army at their disposal, which are the customers and the consumer. And I think at the end of the day, specifically to PHIT, is if we can drive more and more Americans to tell Congress that they support this type of legislation that would allow them to utilize their tax-free dollars to enroll their son in baseball, daughter in softball, kid in soccer, etc., or would allow them to take another class, invest in a gym membership, that's the voice that needs to be heard. So first and foremost, take action, click the link, send the one-click campaign. But then at the end of the day, if you're a member of HFA, thank you. But if you're not a member of HFA, we need you at the table, because not only does your membership inform us to be able to inform Congress about the impacts on the industry, but what it does is it financially helps support, make it possible. We, as I mentioned earlier, we're the only nonprofit in this space. Every dollar we receive from our members goes into making sure that we can do this work and we can get it done. And thankfully to those who have been our members along the way, we've gotten it this far. And with everybody at the table, we're only going to go further.
Yes, and I'm just going to make a quick plug. You talk about financial support, and I'm going to make a plug for supporting the PAC. The PAC supports the legislators who are up there fighting every day for us. And to that point, we are late. We've got 3 events to go get to tonight. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.